Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pat Clark. I'm the director at President James Buchanan's Wheatland, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our first in a series of 3 lectures for the 2019 season for presidential lectures. Before I give you a little commercial about some upcoming programs, I would ask you, if you're like me and you carry a cell phone, that you try to put it on silence so that we don't have ringers going off in the middle of our lecture. We've been making some plans for an exciting autumn for you, a lineup of programming. We're going to be coming out with our October events calendar real soon. You can get a hard copy very, very soon. If you're a member, you'll be getting it, I think, pretty quickly. On October 5th, Saturday, October 5th, we're going to have the African American Heritage Walking Tours that last approximately 90 minutes. So they depart from the Lancaster City Visitor Center. And you can go to their website, aahsscpa.org, or call their phone number, 808-2941. There's going to be a living history on the first Saturday also here at Wheatland. This will be the last living history for the season, and it's entitled Events Over Which He Could Have Exercised No Control. I'm going to leave that to your imagination. The Tanger Arboretum Nature Series, Bats and Owls Under the Full Moon, is going to be Thursday, October 10th, starting at 6:30 p.m. Very apropos. And then we're going to have our Civil War Living History Encampment on October 12 and October 13. On Saturday, it starts at 9 a.m. and goes till 5 p.m., and then they have lantern tours at the encampment from 6 to 8 p.m. On Sunday, the encampment starts at 10 o'clock in the morning and goes till 4. And then our October lecture, but let me pause on that and tell you a little bit about something else. Back in 2015, we finished a very important document here at Lancaster History called the Comprehensive Preservation Plan for the Wheatland Historic Site. And I'm really pleased to tell you, my colleague Robin Surratt told me that out of our $500,000 goal, we have raised to date $340,000. If you would like to help us out, please see Robin. She's right over there waving in the hallway. See me, see Tom Ryan. He's right there. Or give us a call or go online. If you want to go online, all you have to do is to our website, LancasterHistory.org. And the web page is actually... LancasterHistory/roof. There you go. LancasterHistory/roof. So, hope you want to help us out there. Okay. So we do have a couple of more lectures. Our October lecture, which I think is getting darn close to being sold out as well, also includes a book signing. Dr. Thomas Balchersky, who was with us in the past as well, has just released his new book, Bosom Friends, The Intimate World of James Buchanan and William Rufus King. So that is on Thursday, October 17th, here in this room, and we'll start with the reception at 4 o'clock and followed by the main presentation at 4:30. Our November lecture is James Buchanan and the Preservation of the White Man's Republic, and that is scheduled for November 22nd. That also has a book signing with Dr. Joshua A. Lynn, who will be coming and discussing how James Buchanan and fellow Democrats pioneered the populist politics of racial and gender backlash. So that's our lineup. And let me tell you a little bit about today's lecture and our esteemed scholar, Dr. John Belohlavek. John teaches at the Department of History at the University of South Florida in Tampa. I met him back in 2008 when he was one of our speakers at our national symposium. John earned his bachelor's at Thiel College in Greenville, PA, and defended his Ph.D. at the University of Nebraska, which is where he also earned his master's. He has been awarded Fulbright Hayes Award, Azerbaijan State University in the USSR, Excellence in Teaching Awards at Florida, University of Florida in 1989 and 1994. He's also been awarded the Walter Prescott Webb Lecture Series at the University of Texas at Arlington. Some of John's publications include George Mifflin Dallas, Jacksonian Patrician, Let the Eagle Soar, The Foreign Policy of Andrew Jackson. Another one, Patriots, Prostitutes, and Spies, Women in the Mexican-American War, published in 2017. So John is a wonderful scholar, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming John to the podium.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here on a Lancaster Friday night. I know you had choices of things you could do, and to paraphrase a night in Indiana Jones, you chose wisely. Thank you for being here. As Patrick mentioned, I was here about 10 years ago, and what a change to come back after a decade. To see this building is just amazing. The progress that's been made. Tom Ryan, Pat Clark, the folks who are here at Lancaster History and at Wheatland. And, you know, honestly, as someone who travels about the country doing these kinds of things as an historian, I really hope, and I know you do, value what you have here. This is a real treasure, truly. It's managed with class, with style, with grace, and incredibly professionally, so that as someone who comes, from Tampa, Florida, and comes into a situation like this one where I have the opportunity to chat with you all, for a half an hour, and to do it in this kind of an environment, with Wheatland here, with this center here, with the resources that you have available to you. I know that you appreciate it, and if you're not, and this is not a paid political announcement, I really hope that you will sign up and become part of Lancaster history and a patron of Wheatland as well. I mean, it is a real treasure, and you are fortunate to have it. So, again, I plan on coming back. So, James Buchanan, I'm going to be candid with you. I'm tired of it. I'm just tired of it. James Buchanan, as many of you in this room know, is incredibly maligned. We had a conversation last night with some folks, and we talked about changing impressions of James Buchanan. And some of you may be among those who, along the way, either read particular works, maybe in your high school or college education, or just being exposed to film or literature or whatever. You've garnered an impression of Buchanan, and that impression, may have changed over time. Certainly, historians, many of them, and the presidential rankings. So any of you look at the presidential rankings that will come out periodically? Anybody in the room do that? Okay, some of you do. I'm sad to say that James Buchanan is invariably not ranked very highly. Right? Will you accept that? Yeah. And again, I find that disappointing. Not that I expect Buchanan to be in the top 10. I think we all understand, if we follow the Civil War period, the 1850s and 60s, that certainly there were domestic crises that the president was involved with that do not shine a good light on his reputation. Now, we can talk about Bleeding Kansas, we can talk about the Dred Scott decision, we could talk about the Lecompton Constitution, John Brown. I mean, there are any number of things that occur domestically during Buchanan's presidency that do not look good. And I grant that. I grant that as an historian, and I suspect many of you do the same. The country was in bad shape. We were in turmoil. We were headed towards secession, if not civil war. And again, I happen to be one of those historians who honestly believe that virtually anyone could have been president in the late 1850s, and we were headed towards secession. Now, that doesn't mean, ladies and gentlemen, that a war was inevitable. It doesn't mean we had to have a civil war. It depends who the leaders were in Congress, but particularly in the White House, as to whether or not a war took place. Lincoln, as we know, had a particular viewpoint, right, on secession. In Lincoln's mind, it can't happen. It's unconstitutional. It is simply not in the tradition of the Founding Fathers, whether looking at the Declaration of Independence or even the Constitution. Somebody, however, like, say, a Millard Fillmore or James Buchanan, might well take a different tack. There's nothing in the Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, that says you cannot secede. Nothing there. So if you narrowly interpret the Constitution, then you say, I abhor what's happening, but I don't see anything that empowers me as the President of the United States to do anything about it, as long as that secession is not violent. Now, once it becomes violent, we might all agree that that becomes treason, rebellion. Those more than 100 volumes that recount the correspondence of the American Civil War, or as we say in the South, the War of Northern Aggression. Those official documents are called the official records of the rebellion. The rebellion. Buchanan is an interesting, complex man. And in my mind, the consummate unionist. What Buchanan wants to do, folks, is save the country. He wants to save the Union and is willing to pay virtually any price to make that happen. There are many, mostly Northern Democrats, who are of a like mind. They are obviously going to encounter opposition from folks like Thaddeus Stevens and others. By the by, right, you were incredibly fortunate, right, about to give birth to a new Thaddeus Stevens Center, which will be downtown. Again, what an opportunity for you all to support something that is incredibly important. To have Buchanan and Stevens in the same community is, wow, lucky you. Hey, look, when I take my students someplace, for us in Florida, history begins at Disney World. Yeah. Hey, kids, want to go on a field trip? Let's go to Orlando. I fairly salivate at the notion of being a college or high school or middle school teacher here in this area, Eastern PA, and being able to take advantage of what these teachers can. Lucky them. I'm going to ask you tonight to take a look at Buchanan in a different way. Set aside the domestic issues. regardless of how you think about Buchanan in terms of his domestic policy. And again, I'm not here to defend Buchanan on those issues because I too see the flaws, the errors in judgment. Now, again, we'll have time for Q&A. You want to talk about those kinds of things, that's fine. I'm happy to do that. But I'm here to make the argument tonight that let's look at Buchanan in terms of his foreign policy. Let's look at a dedicated American who loved the Union and whose goals and actions were intended to rally and unify the country at a critical juncture in our history. This is not the first time somebody would have done something like this, by the way, nor the last. William Seward, some of you may know, suggested to the Lincoln administration that they might start a war with Spain in early 1861 in an effort to rally the country and bring the South back in the Union. You can imagine what Lincoln thought of that idea. Importantly, folks, please understand that even in failure, where a Buchanan policy is genuine and there's a realistic concern for American security, for American commercial progress, and for goals that would be pursued by later administrations. So it's not just the one-off here we're talking about. I'm not sure, again, we've got a great crowd here tonight. I'm not sure how much you know about old Buck. But I tell you what, he's, again, a fascinating man. And I'm so pleased, though, I was talking to Pat earlier, and he mentioned tonight the folks you've got coming in to talk about Buchanan. You got Tom Bilcerski coming in, of course, next month. And I mean, you've got people coming in next couple of months that I hope you're here for those talks as well. Some of them are more sympathetic, with Buchanan than others. But Buchanan's a Lancaster guy, isn't he? I mean, he is. I mean, yeah, I know he's born, to the west. He's a Franklin County guy. Educated at Carlisle, but he comes here as a young man and makes his home. Right? He makes his home here. One of his biographers defines him as intelligent, calculating, persuasive, and articulate. I mean, think about that. Amidst all the talk about Buchanan in the late 1850s, is that the kind of descriptor we think of? No. He's muddling, he's bungling, he's confused everything. Oh my God, the country's going to hell in a handbasket. We wouldn't think of him as intelligent, calculating, persuasive, and articulate. By the way, we probably could have added stubborn as well, because he was that. He could be socially engaging. You could find him in downtown Lancaster here with a black cigar in his hand and a glass of Madeira. There, of course. I mean, you were into the Eichholz paintings, right? This, of course, is an Eichholz of James Buchanan. And again, take a look at the image, all right? Over time, it's the president, but isn't he kind of smooth? Isn't there something that just, right? I mean, he's a styling guy, isn't he? Look at that, the collar, right? Now, again, those of you who know about Buchanan personally know that there was an issue with his eyes, right? I mean, if you look at this Eichholz painting, you can really see it there, actually, that the one eye looks to the right, the other eye does not. And this is a condition. It's a condition. And it does put off people in some cases, certainly, because they're not quite sure. I mean, you're talking to the man, and you realize after a period of time, and if you're Buchanan, you can imagine what happens is he can see your recognition that there's something going on, and bang. That moment when you realize that he has this issue that he would be self-conscious about. Nonetheless, people find him to be one-on-one. Certainly he can be engaging. Right? He was a successful attorney here in Lancaster, certainly for years. He built a political reputation. And a good one. I mean, this was Federalist country. All right? Here into the east, into Philadelphia, a lot of Federalists, Hamiltonians. I saw, by the way, there's a Hamiltonian Society. I assume that's Alexander Hamilton. It's here in Lancaster. It's only in the 1820s that James Buchanan morphs into a Democrat. He sees which way the country is going, particularly sees which way Pennsylvania is going. And he becomes a Jacksonian. Okay, so he changes parties. You almost have to. The Federalist Party is dying, so you have to get on board. He sees the Jackson train is leaving the station, and he becomes a Jacksonian. Now, that's not easy, because here he is in Pennsylvania. This is an industrial state, a rising industrial state, lots of industry. And yet, at the same time, the Jacksonian vision, the small farmer, the yeoman farmer, expansion across the country, manifest destiny. Our God-given right as Americans to extend our borders from sea to shining sea. And maybe beyond. Who knows what God's plan is for the United States? Well, we kind of know, don't we? It involves displacing Indians. It involves conquering Mexicans. And it involves challenging the Spanish, the British, the French, and anybody else who gets in our way. Buchanan, folks, is at the vortex of this. He's there. The man is a senator. He's a congressman. He's American minister to Russia. He is the Secretary of State. He's minister to Britain. How much more talented can you be? How much more qualified can you be? And James Buchanan's destiny seems to be tied to that of this country. The Monroe Doctrine. Now, there's something you think about each night, isn't it? Say, I wonder how in the heck the Monroe Doctrine's doing. I haven't thought about that in a while. I know. We'll talk about it later. We don't have a lot of policies, ladies and gentlemen, in the early republic. There's not a lot of overriding principles. But we talk about the Monroe Doctrine. It's the only thing anybody knows, by the way, right, about James Monroe? I could put 4 pictures of people on the board, including Woody Woodpecker, and my students would have trouble identifying James Monroe from Woody Woodpecker. Or Elmer Fudd. The idea of identifying Monroe, he's invisible, is he not, except for the Monroe Doctrine. December 1823. The Democratic Party, the democracy, embraces that particular policy, which fundamentally says we will not tolerate interference by any European power in the Western Hemisphere. It's ours. It's ours to protect. It's ours to guide. It's ours to provide political inspiration. In turn, we promise we won't interfere in Europe, but by golly, you better not interfere in the Western Hemisphere. Now, can we enforce that? I don't know. I don't think so. But it's a goal. It's something that Americans like to believe can happen. right? We can stop the Europeans from interfering, and we can keep the Latin Americans, under our guidance, under our umbrella. Buchanan refers to Monroe Doctrine. This is in 1856. He talks about the Monroe Doctrine, and he sees the principles of the Monroe Doctrine basically as sacred, as does the Democratic Party. He doesn't talk much about foreign policy after he's elected in 1856, but the party and Buchanan are understood to support the Monroe Doctrine, whatever that means, and we're going to interpret that in just a couple of minutes. He will be aided, if we can call it that, by this fellow. This is Lewis Cass, whose opponents spelled his name without the C. Historians, well, if you look at Cass here, he doesn't exactly inspire you, does he? He was described by one contemporary as overweight, indolent, and close to senile. In some, worse than useless. Now, you may ask, why then is he even up there, right? Well, he was the Democratic Party's candidate in 1848. He got a lot of votes, didn't win, of course. But he was a legend in the party, had been around for decades and decades. And when he became elected president, Buchanan needed somebody as a front man who was a recognizable figure in the party. And Lewis Cass was that person. Now, what this means, of course, and one might surmise this, that by design, Buchanan intends to be his own Secretary of State. And he does. And he does. He is going to formulate and manage and execute foreign policy literally by himself. Literally by himself. Buchanan is close friends with the British Foreign Secretary, a guy named Lord Clarendon. And he complains to Lord Clarendon during his presidency that, quote unquote, my responsibilities are so onerous that no man can very long bear the burden. There must be some change. But innovation is difficult. Well, this is reflective of a micromanagement style. Buchanan didn't have to do this. He wanted to. So almost alone, ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to credit Buchanan in foreign affairs, we're going to blame Buchanan in foreign affairs. Right? Just as we would do, for example, in domestic policy. Buchanan attempts to rejuvenate Manifest Destiny. If you will, it's old wine in new bottles. He sees Manifest Destiny, American expansion, trade, commerce, American national honor as a way to bring this country back together, as a way to heal us. Get us all on the same page, loving our country, concerned about our country, advancing our markets, advancing our commerce. To paraphrase or quote a more recent president, it's the economy, stupid. It's about economics. It's about markets. But it's about more than that. Now, he's going to be challenged every step of the way by the rising Republican Party in Congress, including our friend Thad Stevens. You can read some of Stevens' views of Buchanan out here in the exhibits. No love lost there. Republicans are particularly concerned that any expansion would involve the extension of slave territory. Make matters worse, Buchanan's own party, the Democrats, split by 1858. There is a Stephen Douglas faction, and they're regularly sniping at each other. So here's James Buchanan, folks, trying to advance his domestic and his foreign policy positions with solid opposition from the Republicans, but also opposition within his own party. Sometimes, let's be honest, Buchanan could be his own worst enemy in the way in which he dealt with some people. Some of what he does is self-inflicted missteps. With these limitations in mind, and marveling perhaps that there are any accomplishments that come about, let's take a look at some of the nitty-gritty of his foreign policy. And again, for sake of time, some of this I will go through more quickly than I would like, but again, I welcome your questions at the conclusion of my remarks. Latin America. Latin America. This is basically the area that would be touched by the Monroe Doctrine. Now, that's as we interpret it. All right, that's as we interpret it. Into the 1840s, the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America, perhaps even touching the northern part of South America. We are concerned about a presence on the part of the Europeans in this area. We want them out. We don't want them involved. We don't want them influencing, loaning money, or in any ways gaining power, hegemony over these countries, or gaining new colonies, for sure. We had opportunities to intervene. We had opportunities to intervene. And in some cases we did, in some cases we didn't. We'll talk about those. But the one that is particularly fascinating, I think, for us this evening, and one that you may or may not know something about. Well, let me ask, just because I want to talk to this person later, has anybody been to Paraguay? Who's been? Have you, ma'am? Wow. I'm impressed. Talk to me later, will you? Anybody else been to Paraguay? I know, Paraguay is one of those things you think about like the Monroe Doctrine, right? It's just, you'll lay awake at night saying to yourself, golly, I haven't thought about Paraguay in a long time. Well, James Buchanan did. James Buchanan did. By the 1850s, the U.S. Navy had become more than just a military force. It had become a force for scientific and geographic exploration. There was an expedition. Charles Wilkes launched this expedition, late 1830s, early 1840s, the South Seas. He explored science, geography, botany. It was incredible. The American public was right there in the palm of his hand. Americans loved this kind of thing. And the Navy provided a wonderful entree because you had the skill sets. So the Navy was more than just the military. In the early 1850s, there was a ship called the Water Witch, and we'll show you an image of that. There was a, let's see if we can, oh, there it is. Good. There was an American gunboat that was using its skill set to explore the Parana River. Now, the Parana River goes here up into, from really around Montevideo, it goes up here through Paraguay and then into several other countries, unfortunately, Bolivia, Brazil, and Argentina, that border on Paraguay. These countries have very tense relationships with each other. The president of Paraguay said to the captain of the Water Witch, you know what, you may, in fact, his name was Thomas Page, you can explore in Paraguay, explore the Parana River, But under no circumstances may you transcend Paraguayan waters into the territory of our enemies. Page did this. He paid a price. His ship, here is the Water Witch. This is a U.S. Navy gunboat, is fired upon by the Paraguayans, and a sailor is killed. This is in 1855, folks. This is more than a year before James Buchanan takes office. Franklin Pierce's administration did nothing. There was conversation, there was talk. Any hopes of a treaty with Paraguay were abandoned. The Paraguayans did not apologize. They didn't pay reparations. Nothing happened. When Buchanan became president, things changed. He labeled Paraguay's actions unjustifiable, insulting, and arbitrary. He sounded very much, by the way, like Andrew Jackson. He insisted on satisfaction. The interests of America demanded satisfaction. Our national honor had been impugned. An American ship had been fired upon unjustly. Damage had been done to that vessel, and an American sailor had been killed. We demand satisfaction. We demand a show of force. Wow. And you know what? We got it. We got it. A 19-ship fleet. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. The largest naval flotilla ever put together by the United States up to that point is sent to invade Paraguay. October 1858. Can you imagine those poor Paraguayans? Huh? Well, can you imagine everybody, in Montevideo, right, in Uruguay, as these 19 ships show up, including, I think it's 10, 11 steamships, 2,500 men, 200 guns. This is serious business. Now, most of those ships could not, because of the depth of the hulls, they couldn't get up the river. But you can imagine the impression that they made, not just on the Paraguayans, who thought, oh, shoot, we got ourselves in a heap of trouble now, but with everybody else in the area, plus all the European diplomats. Because needless to say, the English, the French, the Spanish, everybody's there, taking this all in. And if you think that this prompted a rapid negotiation, it surely did. It surely did. The United States basically got what it wanted in terms of reparations and apology, treaty. Now, let's be honest. Did this result in millions and millions of dollars worth of new commerce with Paraguay? No, not really. But did it make a point? Absolutely. Absolutely. American honor. You don't fire on an American ship. There's a price to be paid. So Buchanan is making a point here to rally the American people. He's delivering a foreign policy message, and it's one that resonates. It is, for those of you who study the later 19th century and know Theodore Roosevelt, this is kind of a harbinger of TR. This is a harbinger of the Great White Fleet that Roosevelt sends around the world. Don't mess with the U.S. We had this naval power. And particularly when it came to TR and Buchanan, with Latin America, with the Caribbean. Don't even think about it. Now, were there people who said, yeah, this is kind of ludicrous? Sure, there were. But there were more people who made the argument that there's a message being sent here and a president has the courage to make a statement. Great Britain. Great Britain. The British line is never far away. Right? They're in Canada. They're in the Caribbean. They have colonies all over the place. They're a problem. We're worried about them. It's important that Buchanan got along with the Brits. As many of you know, right? He was the American minister to Britain prior to being elected president. Got along famously with them. So, by the way, of course, did Harriet Lane. We'll talk about Harriet in a few minutes. They were very, very effective, right? Establishing positive relations with Foreign Secretary, with the PM, with the court. And his relationships, Buchanan's, are quite clear in terms of dealing with the British, especially as it related to Central America. The United States, folks, wanted a transisthmian route. We wanted a canal or a railroad or at least a road to link the East Coast and the West Coast. How are you going to get goods? Remember, we discovered gold in California, right? We own California now. How are you going to get that gold, right, from those, and silver? How are you going to get the gold across to the banks in the East? You take it all the way around the tip of South America? The dangers, the problems there? No. So the transisthmian route becomes critical, whether it's through, as we'll talk about, Mexico, Nicaragua, whether it's through Panama, wherever. Basically, Buchanan says to the British, it's a direct quote, literally, if you attempt to impede American transit across Central America, to this I shall not submit. To this I shall not submit. So where Buchanan seems to be more warm and fuzzy, open and flexible on a number of issues, clearly, and this relates also to the Monroe Doctrine, don't mess with us, don't mess with Central America or with America's right to link East and West Coast. There are several issues here. And again, we'll go through them fairly quickly. One has to do with territory. Right? The English have territory. There it is. The English have territory. Step out of the frame here. The English have territory here, of course, Belize, British Honduras. They have the Bay Islands here. They've got issues off Honduras. They've got issues off the coast of Nicaragua. In other words, they have territory where they are the predominant influence. We want to eliminate that territorial influence and or control, and everything we can do to make that happen, we do. And Buchanan presses the British to move out. The British largely do this. Now, they don't do it so much with Belize, the Bay Islands, but certainly with Honduras and Nicaragua, they step back. They step back. They don't want to irritate us. They don't want to agitate us. If this matters to us so much, they will return lands to the Hondurans or the Nicaraguans. If this is something they can do to ease Anglo-American relations, they do it. They move land ownership back to them. Now, it's not a total victory for Buchanan, but it's indicative of a priority and something he is pressing. One of my favorites is the Great Pig War. Aren't you glad you came tonight? Huh? Didn't know about the Great Pig War, did you? Most of you. The lady knows about Paraguay, knows about the Great Pig War. So in June of 1859, Lyman Cutler was an American farmer. And again, I won't ask because I know a bunch of you have been to Seattle or Vancouver. if you go up here, here's San Juan Island. And we had determined the boundary between Canada and the United States in 1846, but we had not dealt with San Juan Island. It was jointly occupied. The British were there, the Americans were there, Lyman Cutler was a farmer. He grew potatoes. And on June 15th, 1859, a pig came in and rooted out his potato patch and ate a whole bunch of his potatoes. Farmer Cutler was not happy. He got out his gun and he shot the pig. The pig belonged to the British. They were not happy about their pig being shot. So Cutler's response was basically, well, you should have kept your pig out of the patch, and the British response was, you should have kept your potatoes out of our pig. No, really. So some of you know the name George Pickett, as in the Civil War, George Pickett. William Harney's a general out there. Pickett's a captain. Well, by golly, they call in the troops. Yeah. So the British say, well, I don't think so. So the British have their troops and we have our troops. And you're about to launch the Great Pig War. By the way, Cutler says, I'll give you $10 for the pig. And which I thought was kind of generous too. The British say, no, it's a matter of principle. We don't want your $10. So you almost have this conflict as the troops assemble over Lyman Cutler's murder of a pig, justifiable or not. Here's where Buchanan steps in, folks. He calls in Winfield Scott, who had really, really strong diplomatic skills, and sends him out there, and he is able to negotiate a settlement rather than exacerbate the situation, rather than make things more difficult. Here you have a man who is sent there to ease tension, not provoke, not agitate. The last thing at this point over an issue like a pig, this is not where Buchanan is willing to push the button. Right? And it's to his credit. He diffuses the situation. And it could have been, I mean, it seems ridiculous now, but honestly, it could have been quite serious. And it was in some quarters. Again, because it became, for many, a matter of national honor. Right? That pig was on his land. Right? No, you shot my pig. The African slave trade. The African slave trade. The African slave trade was a real problem. The Americans had not been, shall we say, forthcoming in stopping the slave trade off the African coast. We had promised to do so, we hadn't. The British, for their part, were stopping American ships. This was a violation of our honor. Buchanan protested, said, this can't happen. You cannot have, I don't care what kind of, if they're flying the American flag, you can't do it. You can't stop these ships. Well, the British say, well, okay, well, are you going to do anything about it? And Buchanan says, yes. You step back and let us police this, and we will do it. And even though many folks had promised, many presidents had promised earlier, they hadn't done anything, Buchanan does, folks. He does. This is a slave ship called the Wanderer. Over the course of, 59, 60, 58, 59, 60, there are a number of ships that try to find their way into Cuba with their slave cargoes. The Wanderer here is one of them. And the Wanderer, again, is... he gets away with it. He gets away with it. The captain is able to disperse his cargo, 350 slaves, at night outside of Savannah, Georgia. It's widely reported They arrest the captain. Ship is seized. There's nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do. It's in southern courts. All right? You press the case, but can you imagine what a southern jury is going to do? It's terribly frustrating. Buchanan and the Attorney General press the case, but they can't get a conviction. What's important, I think, to understand here, folks, is that Buchanan not only stops, if you will, British harassment of American ships, albeit slavers, and says, we'll do this now. And he beefs up the African squadron. He beefs up the Caribbean squadron. He makes a serious, concerted, and largely successful effort to stop the slave trade. Very impressive. Very impressive. In the limited time we have left, I want to talk about a couple of other things. One is the visit of Prince Albert. This is a truly interesting, exciting topic. Buchanan invites the young Bertie, Albert Edward, known as Bertie, 18 years old. He's the little guy there in the center. That's a picture taken when he's in Canada. Here he is, an image in the American press. He comes to the United States in the summer of 1860. His mother, Queen Victoria, is quite concerned that he may be led astray. He likes wine, women, and song. Concerned that he may embarrass the country. He does not. It is an amazing month in Canada and month here in the U.S. Part of it, of course, is due to this young lady right here. This, of course, is Harriet Lane. This is the demure Harriet Lane. All right. And, clad in her Victorian garb. Here is the glammed up Harriet Lane. She was, known certainly as what would be called today a fashionista. She was a trendsetter in terms of style, in terms of culture, in terms of parties and dinners, in terms of dress and manner. Buchanan was fortunate to have her. And the visit of Prince Albert went very, very well. There were a few problems along the way, not caused by Buchanan, but some wonderful stories about the interaction for the time that he was here in the U.S., certainly when he was in Washington. Great stories about Harriet Lane and the Prince bowling 10 pins, which had to be interesting to see that competition. But the visit was so well received that when the Prince and his party got back to Britain, the Queen wrote a thank you note. It was all so well done that you could see that this was not only a success for the English, but particularly a success for the Americans. Here's a shot of a 3,000-person ball that was held in New York at the Academy of Music. So everywhere the Prince went, it was a success. We do not have time to talk about Cuba in any great detail. Unfortunately, you're welcome to ask questions if you wish. But Buchanan attempted to acquire territory. Among the territories he sought to acquire, Cuba. Offered $30 million and then found, of course, that the Spanish were not willing to sell. Would this have made a difference in saving the Union? Perhaps. Perhaps in the short run. If the South basically had been able to convert Cuba into several slave states, maybe that would have made a difference in delaying, at least in the short run, secession. Oh, by the way, this is simply shows you where slavery existed in 1820 on the left. On the right, that is slavery in 1860. So you can see that it has virtually disappeared in the Western Hemisphere except for Brazil and the United States. Mexico. The United States attempted to get territory under Buchanan. in Mexico. Here's territory that we'd acquired back in the 1840s and early 50s. Texas, the Southwest, parts of southern Arizona and New Mexico. What Buchanan wanted to do was, he was hopeful of getting territory here in Sonora and Chihuahua, again, adding to the United States, expanding American empire. Would the South have benefited? Perhaps. Would American farmers have benefited? Maybe. From the Midwest, who knows? Again, the Mexicans ultimately are not willing to sell. And then Nicaragua, a flirtation with Nicaragua that ultimately is not launched by Buchanan, but by so-called filibusters, individuals who wanted to take over countries like Nicaragua with the hope that someday they may annex them to the United States. Here's the leader of that expedition, a fellow named William Walker. There was a film made on Walker some years ago that some of you may have seen. Popular music from the time, talking about the continent is ours. Alaska, yes, we tried to get Alaska. Again, most folks aren't aware of that. Buchanan attempts to buy it. Many would argue it was destined to be a place where we could send the Mormons. You can't make this up. The Mormons were a problem, and so if we could get Alaska, we could send the Mormons there. All right? So you have Cuba, northern Mexico, Alaska. You have a president who is conscious of expanding the country territorially with the idea of benefiting any number of Americans north and south. We would be remiss if we didn't finally mention the Far East. Here is The Barbarian and the Geisha, one of your favorite movies. I know you'll rush home and see it tonight, John Wayne Film Festival. Treaties with the Japanese and with the Chinese are intended to be of commercial benefit to the United States. Those treaties, of course, do come to pass. The markets sadly do not, because the intervention of the Civil War comes about. This is a film, of course, about the American minister during this period to Japan, Townsend Harris, with the intrepid Duke playing our hero. The Japanese come to visit. I would encourage you, of course, to take a look at the incredible sake bowl that is just a few feet away here. With the exhibitions, it's just amazing. One of two, as I understand it, existent. The Japanese do come bearing gifts. They also come bearing the idea that they want to steal our technology. So, again, you have the president trying to expand markets with China and Japan. Here's a great reception that Buchanan has at the East, in the East room for the Japanese. Now, again, my finishing remarks, concluding remarks, just please keep in mind here, you have a man in Buchanan who tries to use foreign policy to bring the country together. He tries a number of different techniques. He tries national honor. He tries markets. He tries expansion. He tries taking territory. He tries harmony and goodwill. But he tries a number of techniques here. Some succeed, some do not. But I hope you all will give him a chance, re-examine his role, his career, his goals in terms of American foreign affairs and promoting union and trying to hold us all together, and recognize that this is a man with good intentions, right? A man that we need to see another side of as we evaluate his presidency. Thank you all very much.